You're listening to the Corbett Report. CorbettReport.com.
All right, friends, welcome back to the broadcast. Welcome back to Corbett Report Radio. I'm your host, James Corbett of CorbettReport.com, and it is currently the 27th of September 2012 for most of you around the world, 28th of September for those of you across the date line, and I am broadcasting live this Thursday night, so thanks for tuning in for tonight's edition of the broadcast. And for those of you who were tuning in live on RBN and on the streams at republicbroadcasting.org or on your radio, last night, you will have noticed that I was not here. In fact, I was unexpectedly absent from the program, so a rebroadcast was aired. So first off, my apologies for people out there. I was planning to have a conversation with Michelle Chossudovsky about weather warfare last night, but unfortunately that fell through because I was sick as a dog and absolutely unable to come to the microphone. So unfortunately, I had to step away for a day yesterday, but I'm back on track today and should be back on track with all of my various work. So thanks for holding out during that. And that also meant that, unfortunately, we weren't able to record an edition of New World Next Week with James Evan Pilato last morning for me either. So that does mean that, unfortunately, there will be no New World Next Week this week. So unfortunately, sometimes that happens and things get the best of us, but I am back on track and back on schedule with everything, including getting out the last DVDs to fulfill all of the orders that have come in so far for my Last Word DVD that's now available through CorbettReport.com. I'm finally caught up and will be sending off the last batch today. That should be everyone who has so far placed an order. And of course, when your order is fulfilled, I will be sending you an email just to let you know that the DVD has been sent out. So thank you all once again for all those people who are supporting my work that way. It is greatly appreciated. And on tonight's edition of the broadcast, we're going to do some news headlines and open phones. So if anyone wants to get in on tonight's broadcast, whatever topic you have on your mind, I'm happy to hear about it. 1-800-313-9443. But tonight we're going to be talking about, well, lies. And since the news is full of lies, this should be a pretty easy broadcast to fill up for an hour. In fact, we'd probably need several hours just to go through all the lies that are currently trending in the headlines. But we're going to expose some of the globalist lies that are being told at this point in time on all sorts of different things, from health and related matters, environmental matters, to economic matters, to the matters of the ever-going, never-ending war on terror. And let's start tonight by just a little humorous tidbit. I want to say humorous because it is ridiculous, but unfortunately it's very real, so I guess we can't say it's that humorous. Apparently Google is now cracking down on publishers, people who publish their own book, for then torrenting their own book. So apparently, even if you make the decision that you want to put your book in the Creative Commons and to put it up on a torrenting site for people to download, Google will then punish your website and delist you from Google AdSense. So there's a person called Cody Jackson who wrote a book called Start Programming with Python, which is a programming language, and he wrote this book while he was deployed in Iraq, and he wanted to give it away for free because he had gotten so much from the open source community, so he wanted to give something back. He put his book for free online in the torrent trackers, and then he also made it available for people who want to donate through his website. He placed some Google AdSense ads for his website on the Google AdSense network, and the Google AdSense bot came back with him and said, you can't be listed on AdSense because you've got copyrighted material on your website. So they're cracking down on copyright by cracking down on people who explicitly have the right to put their works online for free. And when he appealed it, Google apparently looked at the appeal and their AdSense bot came back to say, sorry, your appeal has been denied. You are still in violation. So once again, you're not talking to a real person, and it's like Kafka's never-ending trial, or it's like the seventh circle of hell from which one can never escape. And on that cheery note, we'll be right back with some more lies and news right after these messages. welcome back, friends. Welcome back. This is Corbett Report Radio. Once again, I'm your host, James Corbett of CorbettReport.com, and tonight on the broadcast, we're going to be breaking down some of the globalist headlines that are making news in the world of mainstream information. And it's funny, sometimes you have to dig deep and expose the lies for yourself, and other times the mainstream media actually does it for you. Although generally 4 or 5 decades too late, and after the worst effects of those lies have been, unfortunately, devastating the human community for decades. And here is a prime example of that. So for those of you who've been following the Corbett Report podcast recently, you might have seen my recent podcast episode about GMO foods and their implementation in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and today in what is being called the Gene Revolution, which is a follow-up to something that was called the Green Revolution, which was basically back in the 1950s and 60s, the Rockefeller Foundation and some of the other big agribusinesses really got off the ground and started coalescing into what we now know of as the modern agricultural giants who basically own so much of the world's food production. And the way they were able to do this was, of course, like so many other things, facilitated through the giant, vast, mind-boggling fortunes of the 19th century robber barons, was through philanthropy. Oh, the Rockefeller Foundation was going around the world, helping everyone out, being nice guys. Oh, it's so beautiful. And so in the 1950s, that took the form of them sponsoring various people who were doing such things as going to Mexico to try to solve the problem of wheat production in Mexico. Could they make Mexico wheat self-sufficient and actually an exporter of wheat? Well, that seemed pretty unthinkable until a man named Norman Borlaug came on the scene and started experimenting under the auspices of a Rockefeller Foundation grant and managed to come up with a genetically modified grain that seemed resistant to the types of things that it had to be resistant to, and it grew up strong enough, and it was harvestable and all of this goodness. So it basically, according to Norman Borlaug's adherents, he's saved 1 billion lives because he's forwarded and expanded this technology and made it available to the masses, etc., etc., etc. So if you want more information on that, please go back to my Gene Revolution, the Truth About the Gene Revolution episode of my podcast, where we talk about this and Norman Borlaug and the Rockefeller money that he got to do this, etc. And we broke down some of the lies about the Green Revolution and the Gene Revolution that are thrown about by people, as it was such a wonderful philanthropic thing, and nobody could fault it. When we took a look at a book by, sorry, I wanted to show it for the people who are watching online on the video, but I don't have it right to hand. We looked at William Engdahl's book, Seeds of Destruction, and that book has some excellent information on that, but some more information has just come out from CBS News. So if you turn out to CBS News, if you tune in to a story they have under the headline, Modern Wheat, a Perfect Chronic Poison, Doctor Says, they, in a very roundabout way, tell you the truth about what was really going on back in the days of Norman Borlaug and his supposed saving of 1 billion lives because he was the greatest human being who ever lived, according to such vast treasure troves of information like Penn and Teller. And this article says, it's quoting from a new book that's been released by a Dr. William Davis, who's saying that the wheat that we eat these days is a perfect chronic poison, according to Dr. Davis, a cardiologist who has published a book all about the world's most popular grain. And he says that the wheat we eat these days isn't the wheat your grandma had. It's an 18-inch tall plant created by genetic research in the 60s and 70s. This thing has many new features nobody told you about, such as there's a new protein in this thing called gliadin. It's not gluten. I'm not addressing people with gluten sensitivities and celiac disease. I'm talking about everybody else, because everybody else is susceptible to the gliadin protein that is an opiate. This thing binds into opiate receptors in your brain and in most people stimulates appetite such that we consume 440 more calories per day, 365 days per year. Very, very fascinating stuff, and I suggest you go through and read some of that. Look at the related video they have there. Just tons of more information on this. I have put in an interview request for Dr. William Davis to come on the show to talk about this and to talk about the plant that, assuming I'm pretty sure that he's talking about the plant that was pioneered by Norman Borlaug and the research he was doing, which was introduced because of its abilities to withstand various environmental phenomenon, etc., and was introduced under the auspices of the Rockefeller Foundation. And now 50 years later, we're finding out, oh, by the way, yeah, that wheat that they introduced that supposedly saved the world, actually it makes you want to eat more because it's an opiate that binds to your opiate receptors and stimulates your appetite, so that we're all much fatter now because of this. So thank you to all of those Rockefeller Foundation people who sponsored that and brought us into this wonderful world of big agra and the complete monoculturization of the food supply. Oh, what a wonderful thing it is. Well, let's move on to some other horrific lies that have been told in the past by Big Agra as a way to get us to sign on to their poisons. Of course, number one being that GMO food is perfectly safe. It's the most tested food technology ever invented, so you should go to sleep okay at night knowing that there's nothing wrong with GMOs. Well, a little monkey wrench was thrown into those works earlier this month by a team of French scientists who conducted a new study on GMO and found things aren't all as peachy keen as Monsanto and the others would like to tell you. So let's pick this up from an excellent website called naturalsociety.com. I'm sure most of you have seen it already, but if you haven't, please go there. It is a treasure trove of information on this topic and on a lot of health-related topics as well. So I hope you'll go there. They have an excellent chief editor and writer called Anthony Gucciardi, who wrote an article, I should say, on September 19th. GMO study: rats fed lifetime of GM develop mass tumors and die early. Quote, a new GMO study may very well change the way that the world looks at GMOs once and for all. Complete with shocking and very disturbing photos of rats with tumors larger than a golf ball in size, a new French GMO study has concluded that rats fed a lifelong diet consisting of Roundup containing genetically modified corn suffered serious consequences. While the onset of tumors was the most obvious and damaging effect, the researchers revealed that the rats also received heavy amounts of damage to multiple organs. As a result of the mass tumors, liver, and kidney damage, it was concluded that around 50% of the males and 70% of the females died prematurely as a result of eating only Roundup-tolerant seed or drinking water with Roundup at approved levels set by the United States government. In comparison, only 30% of males and 20% of females died prematurely while consuming traditional alternatives. So once again, you can go there. The study and the various findings are linked up all throughout that article, so you can go and take a look at that for yourself, which I suggest you do. Because once again, this is your life and the life of your loved ones that are on the line, so you should inform yourself about this and how this is working as much as possible. And that is a very, very important study, and I don't think it will be surprising to anyone who's had their eye on this particular ball for any length of time. I think we all have known that this Roundup scam is a scam, and that it is not safe to be consuming these GMO foods, but there's just some more scientific fuel on that fire. And lo and behold, it's only been out for a week or two now, but the Monsanto attack dogs are already out in full force to try to discredit this new scientific research. So let's go to thegrocer.co.uk, which had an article, Monsanto goes on offensive over GM cancer study. It says, Monsanto has moved to discredit research linking its GM maize and best-selling weed killer Roundup to increased rates of cancer in rats. The biotech giant claimed the peer-reviewed study, published last week in the journal Food and Chemical Toxicology, did not meet minimum scientific research standards. It concluded that rats fed NK603 maize or drinking water containing small traces of Roundup developed multiple organ failure and died earlier than rats supplied with conventional maize and drinking water free from Roundup. That was the first study to look at the long-term effects of Roundup and NK603, which has been approved for human consumption based on 90-day feeding trials. Scientists found that rats developed mammary tumors and severe liver and kidney damage as early as 4 months in males and 7 in females, compared with 23 months and 14 months respectively in a control group. This study does not meet minimum acceptable standards for this type of scientific research. The findings are not supported by the data presented, and the conclusions are not relevant for the purpose of safety assessment, Monsanto claimed in a statement over the weekend. Toxicologists and public health experts find fundamental problems with the study design. Critical information about how the research was conducted is absent, and the data presented do not support the author's interpretations. So you can go and continue to read Monsanto's little diatribe there, but unfortunately, this is, of course, not the first example of Monsanto lashing out at any research that happens to go against what they're talking about, and it will not be the last, I'm sure. But linked up in the in the comments section of this Grosser article is a lot of links by people to various posts that in the past have shown that Monsanto is lying through their teeth about basically everything they do. So there's a link to a Washington Post article, Monsanto hid decades of pollution. There's a gmwatch.org article about Monsanto's unscientific attempt to wiggle out of this hole. There's links to earthopensource.org, responsibletechnology.org, mercola.com, all sorts of links there for different alternative viewpoints on this study and its and the GM holocaust that is being wreaked on our environment even as we speak by Monsanto and its cronies in the biotech industry that once again are being supported by the Rockefellers, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, all of these wonderful philanthropic organizations that want to save another billion people by feeding us poison. So as always, we have to do the research for ourselves and look for alternatives. And on that note, we're going to come back right after these messages. Welcome back, friends. Welcome back. This is James Corbett of CorbettReport.com, and we are going over headlines and news tonight and exposing lies and showing the lies where they are. But it's not my position here, and I'm not trying to just be defeatist and to tell everyone that everything is doomed and everything's a lie. I think there has to be the alternatives as well. And just on that note of what we were talking about before the break about the GMO foods and how they're finally, well, once again being exposed for the lie that they are and the poison that they are, it's also not our job simply just to accept our fate and just continue eating the GMO junk that they're trying to shove down our throats. There has to be an alternative, and for people stateside, why don't you take a look at nongmoproject.org, where you can find out about, well, products that don't contain GMO foods, and they've got their own list there. So don't wait for the government to come along and force corporations to put some kind of label on their foods. Why on earth would we wait for some sort of law on that front? Why not just take the power into our own hands, where it always has been and always will be, to set up something like nongmoproject.org, where you can keep track of what foods are safe and are not filled with GMO junk for yourself. So the power lies with you, not with the government, and not with campaigning for another law from on high in Washington, D.C., because we all know where that ultimately leads. And speaking of where that ultimately leads, let's talk about another lie that's being propounded from Washington and other capitals around the world these days, and that's the lie of quantitative easing. Oh, yes, this printing of the money in just unlimited amounts, just over and over, increasing the amount of money going into the system. This is all good for the economy. It's going to create jobs, and it's just such a wonderful, loving thing that they're doing, these central bankers. And we know that that's a lie top to bottom, but here's an interesting part of this that I'm not sure everybody is aware of or not thinking about specifically. Part of what's going on with all of these quantitative easings and why, for example, we see Mario Draghi admitting or announcing quantitative easing in Europe, followed very quickly by Chairman Bernanke announcing it in the US, followed very quickly by the Bank of Japan announcing it here, and China announcing their own stimulus, etc., etc. Why are they all doing it at the same time? Well, it's because no one wants to be the loser in this global currency game. Because once again, when you are devaluing your currency by printing more and more and more and more, well, that's going to lower the value of your currency, which for your exports gives it an advantage. Your exports suddenly become cheaper because your currency is lower. And this is an interesting aspect of this game that's going on right now, and it was captured pretty well in an International Business Times article from yesterday, Global Currency Wars in Full Escalation. It says the worldwide currency debasement war has now entered a new and more deadly phase. Central banks have escalated the combat plan to bring about the world's weakest currency for their individual countries. On the heels of the Federal Reserve and European central banks' promise of unlimited counterfeiting forever, the Bank of Japan announced last week that it would expand its purchase of Japanese government bonds and other assets, including equities, by 10 trillion yen. This brings the latest round of BOJ intervention to a total of 80 trillion yen. The sad fact is that the developed world central banks are in a desperate battle of one-upsmanship. The ill-founded goal is to wreck their currency's value in relationship to other fiat currencies in order to boost manufacturing and stimulate economic growth. But once again, these central bankers have their economics backwards. Well, duh, no surprise there. Well, anyway, you can continue reading that article for more on that take, talking about the global currency wars that are in full swing, and it's not something that people are necessarily talking about, but it is happening. And it relates to all sorts of things that are happening on the global economic stage right now that are of world historical significance. The replacement of the US dollar is the reserve currency, and it hasn't exactly been, the dust hasn't settled on that yet, but China's renminbi is looking more and more like it could be. The yuan might in fact take over or at least supplement the US dollar's role as a reserve currency. And recently, China and Japan have signed an agreement to trade in Chinese yuan. So this is getting very, very interesting. And we'll have to see how it plays out, but it cannot be a good thing for most people, especially people who still have their assets and their value and their net savings in paper. If you have it in paper, good luck to you, because you're going to need it. Here's one example of that from Zero Hedge. Japanese Ministry of Finance to Japanese bondholders: you're screwed. Haha. Yes, the Japanese Ministry of Finance has on their blog, they have a post of asking a question: what will happen to government bonds in the case that Japan becomes insolvent? And the answer is, rest assured that the Japanese government will redeem the bonds responsibly. But of course, in this case, what that means is that they promise they'll pay it back eventually as they're able to, in whatever form the currency takes, in whatever future society people would be living in. So basically, if the Japanese government becomes insolvent and has to, completely revalue their currency and issue some sort of new fancy currency or whatever, they'll redeem the bonds in the new currency if they're able to over a period of years. And of course, most of the pensioners who will be relying on their bonds at that point will probably be dead by the time they even see their new devalued currency. But still, just another indication that governments like to assure you, don't worry, if we become insolvent, you'll still be covered. Just buy our bonds, don't worry about it. But underlying all of this is the fundamental fact that the economy right now is a confidence game. And if you believe the con man, well, hey, I have a bridge to sell you. It's right there smack dab in the middle of the US. And if you're interested, get in touch. It's only a few $1 million. All right, on that note, let's take another break. We'll come back to continue breaking down some of these lies. Once again, the phone lines are open if you'd like to get in on the conversation. 1-800-313-9443. Let's take a short breather. We'll be right back after this.
If you love your Uncle Sam, bring him home, bring him home. My girls and boys in Iraq and Afghanistan, bring him home, bring him home. I know it will make all the globalists sad. Bring him home, bring him home. It's time we all became aware of them. Bring them home, bring them home. They sent our boys and girls out on a lie. Bring them home, bring them home. Pull the wool over all of our eyes twice. Bring them home, bring them home. I know it's hard to admit we were deceived. Bring them home, bring them home. Remember that we're all just human beings. Bring them home, bring them home. I may be right, I may be wrong. Bring them home, bring them home. But I've got a right to sing this song. one thing I must confess. Bring 'em home, bring 'em home. I am not really a pacifist. Bring 'em home, bring 'em home. If an army invaded this land of mine, bring 'em home, bring 'em home. You'd find me up on the firing line. Bring 'em home, bring 'em home. Let's show those control freaks their fallacy. Bring 'em home, bring 'em home. They are not using the right weaponry. Bring 'em home, bring 'em home. The world needs sharing love and truth. Bring 'em home, bring 'em home. And free thinking back in the schools. Bring 'em home, bring 'em home. So if you love your Uncle Sam, bring 'em home, bring 'em home. 'Cause the boys in Iraq and Afghanistan, bring 'em home, bring 'em home. I love you.
All right, friends, welcome back. And once again, this is James Corbett at CorbettReport.com, and that was Bring 'Em Home by L. Evans. And I will include the link to that song in the show notes for tonight's episode. Of course, I always like to feature independent and alternative music by people who are putting out a truth message, and L. Evans is among them. And that also solves the mystery of our closing music here on the program. You might remember a little while back, while I was introducing some of the new bumper music here, I played the outro song for that we're using these days. It's called Particular Violence, and I could not for the life of me find in my email the correspondence I had with the author of that song. Well, finally, he's gotten in touch with me. It is L. Evans, and he's done a number of works, so you can follow the link to that particular video that's up on YouTube. Also, you can look at his YouTube channel, just 3L3VANS, L. Evans, and you'll be able to browse through some of his other work. So I hope you'll check that out and support people who are bringing a truth message, as opposed to the people who are bringing the lie messages. And unfortunately, there's too much of that these days. So let's get into something that has been on the tip of everyone's tongue for a few weeks now, but now that it's finally dying down, let's cover it. So I myself have held back on this story for a while because it did not seem we were getting the full story. It seemed like we were being lied to. And lo and behold, hey, we were. Surprise, surprise. This just out from RT.com. White House knew Benghazi attack was a terrorist act from day one. And it says, from day one, the Obama administration was aware that the September 11th assault on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi was a pre-planned terrorist attack, despite offering up conflicting explanations in the weeks since. Unnamed officials confirmed to Fox News that the White House knew that al-Qaeda-linked terrorists were behind the murder of 4 Americans in Libya, but only today did U.S. Defense Secretary Leon Panetta publicly acknowledge the truth. Secretary Panetta now admits that the Pentagon knew within hours of the assault on America's Benghazi consulate that left Ambassador Chris Stevens and 3 others dead that it was an act of terrorism. Okay, you can go and continue reading through that article, and basically they're just blowing the lid off of this lie that this was all about this video on YouTube suddenly caused this violence in Benghazi. But it is a lie. It's a lie through and through. And as Jack Blood has been going over on No Agenda Radio and others have been pointing out, everything about this is a lie. And first, in fact, the incident didn't even take place in Benghazi. It happened in the next town over. It's just more convenient to say Benghazi. It didn't take place at a consulate or an embassy or any sort of official place like that. It was more of a safe house that was being used at the time. And so it just top to bottom, front to back, everything that they've been talking about has been a total lie. Total lie. So let's start breaking down this lie a little bit further, because once again, just when you start to look at this, the parallels between this and, say, the Osama bin Laden raid are, well, quite striking. And Well, that was something that was pointed out by Glenn Greenwald in The Guardian recently, where he was basically saying the Benghazi incident is exactly like the Osama bin Laden raid insofar as everything that we were told within the first few hours and first few days of that turned out to have been completely a lie, totally contradicted by what came out later. So once again, we've got this habit of the U.S. government to go out guns blazing and say this is exactly what happened, and of course it turns out to be a total utter misrepresentation of the facts. So why was this done? Why are they lying about this? Why do they want you to believe that all of this is about this innocence of Muslims video, and that's what caused all of this violence, etc.? Well, of course, there is the larger picture of how this is one facet of the result of the American presence in Libya. I mean, the fact that America and NATO went into Libya, did its illegal bombing campaign, once again not authorized by Congress. Obama just committed troops to a kinetic military action, completely eviscerating what was even left of the War Powers Act, which in itself is an evisceration of the Constitution, because there has to be a full formal declaration of war by the Congress. But the War Powers Act gets around that. Well, Obama's gotten around the War Powers Act, so now he can just say, the UN has declared it, so I will go in. I will declare that we will go in. So that's how things work in this new globalist system. And so the perfectly predictable result of that is the fact that there are going to be a mass destabilization in the region, and this is one of those events that are going to happen out of that. The other point, of course, is this is going to, the official story puts a spin on it that makes the blame, oh, it's all those crazy Muslims going after some video. Wow, they're so crazy, they're so ridiculous. This is just a random act of violence that we had nothing to do with. Of course, when it's seen as an actual terrorist act that was committed on Americans in Libya, well, that sort of puts a different inflection on it and puts into question all of the lies that Obama's been telling about Libya ever since that kinetic military action happened last year. So it would be a pretty disastrous thing for his reappointment, I won't say re-election, campaign, and that's the political side of the spin that's going on. Of course, it's all smoke and mirrors, and the election has already been decided one way or another behind the scenes. I'm imagining at this point that Obama is pretty much guaranteed to be re-elected, but hey, what do I know? Maybe they'll flip the switch at the last moment to Romney. At any rate, it's going to be the exact same thing with a different face. So what does it matter in the end? The answer, once again, does not come from the politics in Washington. That's where all the problems start. And speaking of problems and lies and Washington and terror, let's turn to another interesting thing that happened recently, and it was predicted and predictable, but it is here nonetheless. We have the MEK delisting. Washington openly embraces terrorism. This coming from the LRC blog at LouRockwell.com. That the war on terror is a matter of situational ethics cannot be more clearly demonstrated than by the decision of the U.S. State Department yesterday to remove the Marxist Islamist death and murder cult Mujahideen-e-Khalq from the U.S. terror list. As Glenn Greenwald pointed out earlier this year, the MEK is jointly funded and trained by Israeli and U.S. intelligence to carry out murder and mayhem inside Iran against civilian targets. It is the murderous and violent vanguard of the U.S. and Israeli war against Iran. It launders money from Israel and the U.S. through U.S. politicians who on one side of their mouths scream about the need to fight terrorism, while on the other they accept millions to lobby for one of the most brutal and bizarre terror cults on Earth. Okay, I will stop there. You don't need to go into all of that right now, but if you are interested in the MEK and what they've done and who they are and why basically Washington is now openly embracing this terrorist organization, delisting them from their terror organization list, I will refer you to a eye-opener report I did for BoilingFrogsPost.com earlier this year about the MEK and who they are, where they're coming from, their background, and all of that. But basically, yes, the exact same neocon warmongers who have been screaming about the war on terror are now openly embracing a terrorist group that openly and admittedly targets civilians inside Iran, because if you're killing civilians in Iran, that's not terror, that's just good foreign policy, according to these neocons. So this is just, again, another perfectly predictable, but here it is nonetheless, result of this phony war on terror. And as we're talking about phony war on terror and Iran, hey, guess what? Guess what's just happened at the UN? guess who just made a speech? The Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, who we were talking about here on the program a couple of weeks ago as being part of a nuclear smuggling spy ring that had infiltrated the United States as far back as the 1960s, 1970s, and Netanyahu being implicated in that in the FBI's own internal documents that have recently been released by irmep.org. We were talking to Grant Smith about that scandal recently. Well, here's our good old friend Bibi Netanyahu sitting there in front of the UN giving a lecture on the Red Line and Iran. And this is one of those stories that has to really be seen to be understood, and it will probably bring a certain amount of bile to your throat. But yes, the gimmick in this case is that Netanyahu has brought with him a very detailed diagram of the Iranian nuclear weapons program. And if you go to the front of Drudge Report right now, it's up there. And if you go to NewYorkTimes.com, they have this on a story, Nod to Obama by Netanyahu on Iran bomb. And basically, it's Netanyahu holding a crude drawing of, like, basically a cartoon bomb, one of those, round things with the fuse coming out of it. And it literally is labeled first stage, 70%, and there's a line about 2/3 of the way up the bomb. There's a second stage, 90%. There's a line just at the top, just before it goes into the fuse part of the bomb. And then there's the fuse with the final stage and the big spark coming off it. And so Netanyahu gets his red felt marker and he draws the red line at that 90% second stage mark and makes a big speech about how the world must be behind Israel on this and how we must draw the red line before Iran can enter the final stage of enriching nuclear materials to make a bomb. So it is a ridiculous graphic. It's a ridiculous sign of the things that we've devolved to as a human civilization in terms of our political discourse. But I guess it makes the point pretty effectively for people. Here's the red line, and we must strike before then. All right, so let's just read through some of this. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel told the United Nations on Thursday that Iran's capability to enrich uranium must be stopped before next spring or early summer, arguing that by that time the country will be in a position to make a short, perhaps undetectable sprint to manufacture its first nuclear weapon. In his speech at the annual General Assembly, Mr. Netanyahu dramatically illustrated his intention to shut down Iran's nuclear program by drawing a red line through a cartoonish diagram of a bomb. But the substance of his speech suggested a softening of what has been a difficult dispute with the Obama administration on how to confront Iran over its nuclear program. Only 2 weeks after the dispute broke into the open, Mr. Netanyahu on Thursday praised the warning Mr. Obama gave Iran in his own General Assembly speech on Tuesday. "I very much appreciate the president's position, as does everyone in my country," he said. The Israeli leader's speech also suggested that his deadline for a military strike was well past the American presidential election and into 2013, perhaps as late as next summer. So there you go, friends. The World War III is coming along apace and is shaping up quite dramatically with Netanyahu's admittedly cartoonish props at the UN and giving his props to President Obama because the little feud, the little spat that supposedly has been developing between Netanyahu and Obama, and Netanyahu doesn't want to meet with Obama now, and blah, blah, blah. It's still just cartoon politics, and behind the scenes and in front of the world, they're still on the same page, and they're still touting the same line and reading from the same chorus book. So once again, they're still hyping up this Iranian nuclear threat. Oh my God, they might at some point in the future have enough material to make a single nuclear weapon. And Israel has a few hundred lying in their arsenal, but let's never openly talk about that because that would just be absolutely outrageous to mention that fact. And Israel joining the Non-Proliferation Treaty? You've got to be crazy. Of course not. No, they're the sane, reasonable ones. And Iran are clearly the aggressors here. And they've never invaded a country in their history. But still, they're the ones to watch out for. They're the crazy Islamic terrorists. So this is the two-facedness that's taking place at the UN, surprise, surprise, and is being breathlessly reported on by the New York Times, which at the very least I'll give them props for putting in the word cartoonish to describe this diagram, which certainly is. But once again, it's just another startling reminder of how far we've devolved in our discourse. All right, well, those are some of the lies that are trending in the news headlines right now, but there is some truth to be found, and once again, this is not all about pessimism and fear porn. We are here to fill your mind with truth and facts and positivity. So in a certain sense, anytime there is truth that is exposed, no matter how it is exposed, that's a good thing. So when we come back from a break, we're going to be listening to a very interesting clip that's been trending in the last day or two and making the rounds on YouTube, and it's a pretty startling admission of a pretty basic truth that we all know, but it's interesting to hear it coming even from a propaganda mouthpiece. So I'll set it up, I'll explain a little bit more when we come back from this break, so hang on right there. We'll be back in a moment with a little bit more of tonight's Corbett Report Radio.
For their prosperity.
All right, friends, welcome back to the final moments of tonight's edition of Corbett Report Radio. And tonight we have been going over lies and exposing some of the lies that are being propounded, but with the lies sometimes comes a startling bit of truth. So I just want to, on a positive note, I guess, note a little bit of truth that has slipped out from between the cracks. Again, it's nothing that you guys out there won't be familiar with, but it's interesting to hear it coming from the horse's mouth. In this case, in the form of a man named Patrick Clausen, who is an influential figure at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy at washingtoninstitute.org. So if you want to go there, you can find out what they're all about. But he made a very interesting comment at a speech about how to basically get Iran's nuclear program off the table. And they're talking about ways that wars can start, and he makes a very interesting admission about false flag terror as a way of starting war. So let's listen to that clip.
I frankly think that crisis initiation is really tough. And it's very hard for me to see how the United States president can get us to war with Iran. Which leads me to conclude that if, in fact, compromise is not coming, that the traditional way of America gets to war is what would be best for U.S. interests. Some people might think that Mr. Roosevelt wanted to get us into World War II, as David mentioned. You may recall we had to wait for Pearl Harbor. Some people might think Mr. Wilson wanted to get us into World War I. You may recall he had to wait for the Lusitania episode. Some people might think that Mr. Johnson wanted to send troops to Vietnam. You may recall he had to wait for the Gulf of Tonkin episode. We didn't go to war with Spain until the until the Maine exploded. And may I point out that Mr. Lincoln did not feel he could call out the Federal Army until Fort Sumter was attacked, which is why he ordered the commander at Fort Sumter to do exactly that thing which the South Carolinians had said would cause an attack. So if, in fact, the Iranians aren't going to compromise, it would be best if somebody else started the war. One can combine other means of pressure with sanctions. I mentioned that explosion on August 17th. We could step up the pressure. I mean, look, people, Iranian submarines periodically go down. Someday one of them might not come up. Who would know why? We can do a variety of things if we wish to increase the pressure. I'm not advocating that, but I'm just suggesting that this is not a either-or proposition of, it's just sanctions has to succeed or other things. We are in the game of using covert means against the Iranians. We could get nastier at that.
We are in the game of using covert warfare against the Iranians, and, well, they certainly are, aren't they, with Stuxnet and the murder and assassination of the Iranian scientists, bombs going off in their cars, etc. This is certainly one hell of a game, and look at the examples that he cites there, the USS Maine, the Gulf of Tonkin, Pearl Harbor. And any common thread there about these incidents that can be useful in starting wars? Oh, right, they were all false flag events, and they were all used and hyped up and made to demonize political enemies, even though they had nothing to do with those enemies. So, well, actually, Pearl Harbor did have something to do with the enemy, but in that case, it was allowed to happen, and we've gone over that in a previous edition of this very radio broadcast. So, once again, the little bit of truth sometimes comes out, and it comes out in surprising ways, in surprising times, from surprising people. So I will put the link in the show notes for, of course, that video and everything we've gone over tonight, and I hope you will spread that around and show it to other people, because, again, sometimes people just need to hear it from someone in a position of authority that false flag events happen and that they can be used to start wars. On that note, we're fresh out of time, so we're going to have to leave it there. Once again, thank you to everyone for getting in your orders for The Last Word DVD. It's still available for sale, so please continue to get those orders in, and I will fulfill them as they come in. On that note, we'll leave it there, and I'm looking forward to talking to you all again in 23 hours. So until then, thanks for listening, and take care.